Hi everyone, this is Mr. P here with lesson 25 on the new African independence movement. So let's jump in. So the new African independence movement is a movement for a black nation carved out of the United States. We'll be jumping into that in just a moment, but I do want to highlight some key figures. We'll be talking about this man and his brother a little bit later. They're actually from South Philly. This is a photo of some of the founders of the movement. This is Queen Mother Moore, and this figure is Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's wife. So the continuity here from Malcolm X's vision, emphasis on land and vision for independence, for black nationalist vision with the new African independence movement started after his death, his murder. So the Henry brothers, they changed the name actually to become the Obedelli brothers. So Milton and Richard changed the names to Gaidi and Imari, and this is an embrace of this, the call. Not just Malcolm X, but Malcolm X becomes the leading figure. Call for revolution and self-determination. Changing one's name to reflect kind of African heritage becomes really important to many of these folks who knew themselves as new Africans. Now, in conversations with Dr. O, who's an expert on the new African independence movement from Ursinus College, gave a lecture to my students last year. He emphasizes that changing one's name is not necessary, right, for one to feel in charge of their own kind of identity and self-determination. It's about the choice, right? So many new Africans chose to change their name. Those who chose to change maybe one name or not at all are exercising a choice, and that is the essence of self-determination. It's about that choice. In 1968, the Republic of New Africa declares their independence from the United States. Yes, declares their independence from the United States, claiming the right to reparations for past racial injustice. And reparations here are damages for past injustice, past harm. We'll be talking about them in more detail later. So this movement is not just for independence, but also for reparations. For them, that reparations took the place of land. Now, you might be thinking about Special Order, Field Order Number 15 with General Sherman, and how that was given to, several thousand black families in South Carolina, Georgia, parts of Florida too, but was taken back, and that kind of potential promise of land was never fulfilled. This movement takes up that and seeks that it be fulfilled. So they sought South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana for their country. This was the land where most enslaved people were in the Deep South, and therefore is the land that they worked, that they believe they deserve. And the other piece here is that they articulate a frustration that once enslaved people were freed, that they were forced to become citizens of the United States, forced to be citizens of a racist white country. And so part of their grievances is that unilateral decision, as you see here, to make their ancestors and therefore themselves citizens of the country. And then they want everyone to have an informed decision about whether to place their citizenship in the United States or in the Republic of New Africa. And so they begin organizing people into groups called plebiscites to inform both the Constitution of the Republic of New Africa, which becomes called the Code of Umoja, but also, right, to educate them about this decision around citizenship. While many of these methods are peaceful, violence does occur. While at a meeting at Bethel Church, RNA members were attacked by police. It's unclear who shot first. The police were kind of patrolling outside the church and basically staring down the armed guards who are at the doors of the church. Police is injured in this shootout, and they return to basically jail 135 people, who are later released by black judge George W. Pickett. But the police had stolen money from people in the church, and So this is kind of, there was repression of this movement. The RNA tries to meet with, or they do meet with, U.S. Congress with Shirley Chisholm, John Conyers, and some members of the Black Caucus. But Nixon ignores the Republic of New Africa, does not meet with them, refuses to negotiate with them. By 1971, the FBI had raided their headquarters in Mississippi. There had been division within the movement, whether to do work in the North or do work in the South around what they call the national territory, these 5 states that they claim to be the Republic of New Africa. But they continued their work and organized people around these issues. A few things to comment regarding their legacy. They don't achieve their demand for liberation, but we have, I'm going to make 3 points about the importance of their legacy. The first is the importance of education. And part of this is about values and culture shift too, right? The people who understood themselves as New Africans changed many aspects: names, clothing, community structure, and education, and organized their own kind of schools, right? And the importance of education as a tool, the importance of education as a tool for liberation, and to basically educate for not dependency on heroes like Dr. King, but on one's own capacity, right? Think about Ella Baker and her view of education and her view of democratic participation in movements. New African Independence Movement had a similar approach, obviously much more nationalist than Ella Baker was. The other legacy is the economic vision and practice being done today in Jackson, Mississippi, where they had established their headquarters out of their plan called the Jackson-Kush Plan. Kush referring back to Egypt. Mississippi is likened to the Nile here, and so it's acknowledging that African heritage and the presence here. I'm thinking about Langston Hughes's poem. What is it? A Negro Dreams of Rivers. That they're drawing that connection. That's why they established the land around the Mississippi. Why? It's not just because it's similar to the Nile, but also because, right, that's where many of the cotton plantations were, and therefore many enslaved Black folks lived there, and their descendants are there today. This economic vision is practiced in an interracial way. It's Cooperation Jackson. You can read more about their on their website down here. I've linked their YouTube page here too. And Cooperation Jackson is a network of cooperatives, right? Collectively owned businesses, land, etc., and grassroots institutions. They organize people's assemblies. They make sure that people exercise decision-making in the direction of their various institutions, organizations, and whatnot. And this is supported by the mayor, who's Chokwe Lumumba. He's the current mayor, and he's actually the son of Republic of New Africa leader, also Chokwe Lumumba, and wife Anasa Lumumba. Chokwe the father ends up becoming mayor, and the son becomes mayor later, and he's currently the mayor. So the leadership of Jackson lends its support to this vision as well. The other legacy is reparations. They establish a demand for reparations. The Reparations Committee for the United States Slave Descendants has many RNA members on it, Queen Mother Moore being one of them. And they first established the precedent for reparations. This is not a new thing, right? Germany paid reparations to the Allies, probably not a good idea, obviously, in that it led to Germany being vulnerable to economic collapse and therefore vulnerable to Hitler's rise, but I'm digressing. Finland paid reparations to Russia. So in wartime reparations, but also there's other kinds of reparations they establish as precedent, right? The U.S. pays reparations to Native Americans. They paid reparations to the Philippines for damages of using that nation during World War I and their colonialism there. They paid reparations to Japanese Americans. Actually, Ronald Reagan, interestingly enough, signed that $20,000 for families. Germany pays reparations to the Jews who were incarcerated in their camps, and to Israel as well. So there's a precedent for reparations. Why reparations? Well, they write, and Queen Mother Moore, co-authors this. After 244 years of free slave labor and the most inhuman, sinister, and barbaric atrocities which pass in magnitude any savagery perpetrated against human beings in the history of the planet Earth, and in addition additional 100 years of so-called freedom accompanied by terror. They're talking about Jim Crow, housing segregation, and whatnot. The committee seeking reparations for the descendants of America's slaves concludes that the payment of reparations is an absolute necessity if the government of the U.S. is ever to wipe the slate clean, redeem herself, and pay the damages she has inflicted upon more than 25 million American citizens who are members of the Black race. So obviously identifying the slavery as one of the primary reasons, but also, right, of course, Jim Crow segregation and terrorism in the 100 years after. Without reparations, our people can never be on equal terms with the white sons of our former slave owners who continue to reap the abundant benefits of wealth. So they're talking about the accumulated wealth for those who are the descendants of enslavers and created by our foreparents through their centuries of unrequited labor, right? Unpaid labor. The unpaid labor of African slaves laid the foundations for the accumulation of wealth that ultimately made the U.S. the richest country in the world. So we've talked about this before, right? The importance of slavery and capitalism together, working as a system of racial capitalism for the benefit of the few. Besides our unrequited labor, we have given genius to America, the genius of Benjamin Banneker. We've studied him. Harriet Tubman, we know her. Crispus Attucks, we've mentioned him too. Dory Miller. African Americans have given their very lives to preserve the American dream, which they have not shared. So they're talking about not just the physical labor, but also the intellectual labor of Black Americans. The fact that reparations has not yet been included along with the integrationist leaders' demands, right, referring to Dr. King and some of the others, is because they underestimated the depth and the bitterness of our suffering and the intelligence of our people in spite of our indomitable will to die for our rights like men and women on our feet rather than live on our knees. So there's a critique here of the integrationist approach. Reparations becomes, right, the one of the calls of the separatist nationalist vision. Bayard Rustin, he did not support reparations, for example. We've studied him as well. The Black Economic Development Conference, another organization at this time, spokesman is James Foreman. $500 million in reparations is demanded in 1969. Reparations is not given out by the U.S. government, and it remains a demand, one which prior to, Biden effectively becoming the candidate for Democratic candidate for the presidential race, it's important to note that reparations was a topic of discussion, and every year, basically, people push forward a reparations bill, and various candidates, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, have supported it, or previous candidates. Former candidates, let's say, had supported it. And it was a bill not to give reparations, but to research a plan and the need and a potential plan for reparations. So I also want to highlight that reparations is not just about slavery. It's about everything after here, from the way in which the racial wealth gap has increased, right, over the years. And it continues to increase. From 1983 to 2013, it increased. So white folks have expanded their wealth, their average wealth, tremendously compared to Black families and Latino families. Everyone's increased a little bit, but white folks have increased more, and therefore the gap has increased. And so, that is due to several factors. Some of the early increase in the wealth gap during the 1940s and 50s was because of housing segregation. Black families, Latino families did not have access to mortgages, and therefore, and we've studied this, right? They were predatory lenders, predatory contracts that took advantage of Black families, especially those moving north. So housing segregation and lack of access to government insured mortgages led to, right? Home is a way that people, owning a home is a way that they can build wealth. Once they pay off that home home becomes their wealth. Essentially, when we're talking about wealth, we're talking about cash one has in the bank plus their cash plus homes plus other valuables minus any debt. And so the racial wealth gap has increased, and that provides evidence for potentially a need for reparations. So we're going to be discussing in class what should the U.S. government do in response to the demand